Hey everyone, welcome to my honest opinions on Eternal in 2021. I guess this is kind of a part 2 to my previous video about Eternal, which was made not long after it came out, I guess, in 2017. But recently, thanks to watching LoadingReadyRun playing it, I decided to give it a reinstall and see how it's changed. The reason I stuck my head back in was because I noticed that the draft balance seemed to have shifted around quite a lot. You know, the designers clearly learned the ins and outs of making cards for the game over the course of the last few years, and the environment seemed a lot less swingy and snowbally than what I remembered it being from the last time. That plus a good helping of like, oh man, I remember some of these sounds, a little bit of nostalgia, was enough to get me to give it a reinstall and see how it's doing. So Eternal, for those who are not familiar, is made by Direwolf Studios, who also make board games. They made the board game Clank, which is very good, actually. And I think they also worked on the Elder Scrolls card game, which I believe has since been shuttered. I'm not sure entirely about that. Direwolf is made up, or Direwolf hired some veterans of the Magic the Gathering pro community, and it kind of shows in the game. Eternal is very much like Magic, much more so than other online CCGs are. In the same way that most online CCGs, especially shortly after Hearthstone's launch, kind of took after Hearthstone in many ways, Eternal's mechanics are based on Magic's, not on Hearthstone's, very much. And initially, when it came out before Magic Arena existed, it was kind of the closest thing to playing Magic on the internet with a nice UI that you could get, because Magic Online's UI is awful. And Magic Online is not free, unlike this game. My main criticisms of it in the past have been that it also imports a lot of Magic's flaws. Specifically, it's very easy to get land troubles, mana troubles, because you don't get a consistent mana flow of mana over the course of the game, which you'll see shortly. And that the rares are drastically more powerful than other cards. Neither of these things has changed, but I think the overall flow of the environment, at least in Limited, and the card design has matured in a really nice way. And I think the game is the better for it. So I'm just going to jump in. I have a draft going. So we're just going to play a couple games of Limited, and I'll talk through my impressions. So Eternal's structure, again, is very similar to Magic. Players take normal turns. There's no rune terrors or artifact style priority system in this one. You have cards that cost mana as normal, and in this game you have power cards which give you mana. So every time you play a card, play a power card, it increases your amount of available mana, and you can play one power card a turn. Those of you who've played Magic will recognize this as being exactly the same as lands. This hand is perfectly fine. At the start of the game, you have an option that gives you 7 cards, and you can redraw it, which will guarantee you getting between 2 and 4 power, which is nice. And if that fails, you can redraw again. You can go down a card. So the game makes a good effort at getting you a reasonable start. In that most of the time, your opening hand will have enough power in it, enough lands, to get you started. However, starting with 2 lands and not hitting your third land, 2 power and not hitting your third power, sorry, can be game losing, and that will happen sometimes. It is kind of a... So this has been debated a lot in Magic generally. Is it good to have your access to resources be random? There are pros and cons to it. I think it's a lot more nuanced than random equals bad. Chief among its benefits are that it allows newer players to potentially beat more experienced players in games, so you don't feel hopeless, essentially. What did I just get milled? Okay, cool. Yeah, you don't feel like you're losing hope when playing against a more experienced player. I think I'll just attack here. But it also gets you improvising. So unlike in Hearthstone or Duelist, where you just get the same amount of mana every turn, in games like Eternal and Magic, you are presented with different situations. You can have cards of different colors in your deck, which is a strength of the system like this. where you have power that makes different colors of mana, or factions in Eternal, and those colors or factions, excuse me, those colors or factions have different flavor and different thematics, and they'll play differently. I think I might kill this with this, because it's giving them extra mana. Let's give that a shot. So I'll explain what's going on in this part of the game in a second. I think my opponent's got something. Ugh. Fine. Sure. So there's pros and cons to the mana system, and I think generally in games where you're not getting completely shafted by it, it's good. Like, it makes the game more varied. That's scary. Unlike in, again, Hearthstone and Duelist, combat in Eternal follows a kind of attack and block pattern, where one player gets to make their attacks, and the other player has the option to put their creatures in the way, essentially, to defend or not defend. So this is very different from in Duelist and Hearthstone. You get to attack your opponent's minions as you choose. And this is a very snowbally mechanic, right? Where if you're ahead on board and they play something, you can kill it for free. But if you're behind, likewise, it can be very difficult to remove your opponent's minions. Eternal goes for the Magic style option of having, well, I can't. The game no longer has the smoothness of being able to only interact with the game on your turn. Instead, you play in both players' turns. Fine. But the fact that you get to make decisions about how your units take damage and how you take damage makes the game much more interactive, and makes it a bit easier to come back when you're losing than in a game like, especially in Hearthstone, where you can't avoid things. In Duelist, you can at least position to make this benefit. So that's definitely something I enjoy. Like, I do like the decisions inherent in attacking and blocking, especially as Eternal also imports something else from Magic that is generally well loved, which is instants, or cards that can be played on your opponent's turn. I think I attack here, and then I play this. So this card can be played during combat. It buffs your creatures, it gives them more power, and gives them deadly, which makes them kill anything they damage. Which isn't a huge problem here, because most of my opponent's stuff is quite small, but they do have this 6 toughness blocker. And I would like to win at some point. So I'm going to attack and see what they do. Like, my creatures are bigger than theirs, and they don't have much mana up, so they probably don't have a ton of ways to interact. And specifically, the cards that give Death Touch deadly cost 3. So the fact that you can make these kind of decisions where there's like, it feels more like a conversation. I make my opening statement of like, I attack, and my opponent decides whether or not to block, and then vice versa on their turn. So they didn't block this. So I can pay this cost again to buff both my things, which I think I might actually do. Just make this a 5/6, makes it a lot more threatening. I don't get to play my Combre Healer this turn, but I don't think I care about that. Does that work? Please, do the thing. Good. The UI for this Amplify mechanic, where you get to play things repeatedly, is a bit odd. So I think, broadly speaking, Eternal does a really good job of being Magic the Gathering, which is a bit of a glib thing to say, but I think as a game in its own right, and as a homage to Magic, it works pretty well. I used to be a bit annoyed at how Magic-like it was. I was like, oh, come on, make your own mechanics. But I've sort of mellowed out. I think it's pretty reasonable to base your game on Magic instead of Hearthstone, which is kind of what they've done. And Eternal has enough of its own twists on mechanics, and the way it thinks is very different. I'm fine with it. Right, I get to remove the rules text from one of their units, so I could use it to clear this hidden unit, or I can just make a 1/1. I think I'll clear this. Ah, good job I did that, huh? And then this has double damage, so I think I'm going to give it some extra toughness and heal me. Now that's big enough to block that, which is nice. There we go. A lot of the actual mechanics in Eternal, like the card mechanics, are very similar to Magic as well. There's it has all the same keywords. Again, these show up in a lot of games. Like it has Endurance, which is Vigilance, which is a creature that can attack and block. It has, normally when a creature attacks, they can't block the following turn. It has Charge, which is Haste or Rush, or whatever you want to call it. It has Lifesteal. It has Quick Draw, which is the game's equivalent of First Strike or Quick Attack from Runeterra, which is where when a creature attacks and kills the blocker doesn't deal damage back. All this stuff. And then it also has a lot of other mechanics that are similar to or maybe inspired by Magic mechanics. So it has these hidden units, which hidden things like secrets and sentinels from Duelist are not uncommon in games. The hidden units in Eternal work much more like morph units in Magic. For those who are familiar with Magic, morph is like you can play a card basically face down as an invisible unit, and it's just a generic 2/2, and then there's like you can pay a cost to turn it back up. Folks who are really familiar with Magic might know the card Illusionary Mask, which plays things face down, and then if it does anything, like if it deals damage or takes damage or gets targeted by something, then it turns face up, and that's how hidden units in Eternal work. So usually you don't know what they are for like a turn, and then they attack or block, or maybe you try and deal damage to them, and they turn face up. You get to see what happened. So this adds like a pleasing guessing game that mixes up the decision, not necessarily simple, but routine decision of whether or not to attack or block. And it gives you an option to express skill by kind of learning which transform units there are at common and uncommon and playing around them appropriately. I will say that I mentioned earlier that the rares are very strong. Magic and Eternal both have this thing where they'll have rare cards with very powerful rules text on them that also have bodies that are bigger or better than their common equivalents. Runeterra also does this. Like the champions in Runeterra are a nightmare for this. So for instance, the sort of going rate for a creature in Magic or Eternal that costs 2 it's a 2/2. Or in Hearthstone sometimes a 2/2, 2/3 or 3/2. And Eternal has some 2 mana 3/2s and 2 mana 2/3s, but most creatures with like useful abilities are 2/2s for 2 mana. But if they're rare, they get to be bigger than that and have powerful abilities. The most egregious offender is a card called D'Angelo Houndmaster, I think it's called, which is, I think I own one because I drafted it the other day, and it won me the game by itself, basically. It's a 2 mana, it's only a 2/1, which is not in theory scary in itself, but it has Quick Draw, so when it attacks, it deals damage before its blocker. Again, same as first attack in Runeterra. And then it also has, here we go, it also has Valor, which means that when it gets blocked, it gets bigger. So if you block this, it's going to deal 3 damage to your blocker before the blocker gets to deal damage back. And then, sometimes when it attacks, you can pay some mana to get an additional 4/1. These are actually used to make 4/4s, and it was nerfed the other day because it was completely egregious. I drafted this in my previous draft deck before this one, and in one of the games, I played it on turn 2, and my opponent just lost. Like, they could never deal with it, because a 3/2 quick draw backed up with pump spells that makes other units is completely unreasonable, and you don't get that lower down the rarity scale. Another relatively famous, egregious example is Sandstorm Titan. I'm trying to type around my microphone here, so I do apologize. Sandstorm Titan, this thing. Normally, you would see maybe a 4 mana 4/4 with an ability. This card is a 4 mana 5/6 with 2 good abilities. And although it does, just trade 1-for-1 with their removal spells, it completely dominates the board with no effort if it is unanswered. Unless your opponent has some very, very big late game creatures. And this means that you get a separation between cards that are constructed playable in that they're sized like this and limited cards. And sort of when you open packs, a lot of the cards you open are kind of useless. There are some spells and a few lower rarity creatures that see play. But because the rares are so good, they overpower everything else. And so it's very difficult to justify playing lower rarity cards when you have access to higher rarity cards, which in turn makes the game, the constructed format of the game, inaccessible to newer players. I own a bunch of these because I crafted them in the past. Like, I ran out of gold at one point doing drafts, and I decided to... They had just re-added Sandstorm Titan and another legendary card that I used to play to the standard format. And so I was able to throw together a deck without having to craft too much stuff. Because the crafting in this game is very expensive. I have what looks like a lot of crafting resource, but a single legendary is 3,200 and you can play up to 4 copies in your 60 card deck. So if you're playing, is it 60 or 75? It's a large amount of cards. Yeah, I think it's 75 cards in a deck. So this would get me barely 1 playset of a legendary, or 4 playsets of rares, which are 800 to craft, which is such a small portion of a deck. In limited though, you don't have to worry about that too much. Rares come up, but pleasingly, I think again they're doing a bit better job of making it possible to deal with them now. So one big problem that Eternal used to have was that the removal was very hard to come by, and a very typical play pattern in Eternal of 2017 was a player would just play a random 2-drop, and then they would play a buff on it, making it like a 4/5 or something, and just that would just win the game. They would snowball from there. It was very difficult to put up a reasonable block, and there were lots of combat tricks, namely things you can play during combat. So I attack with my 2/2, you block with your 2/2, I play a spell that makes my 2/2 bigger, it then kills yours, and I still have a creature. So if you put a permanent buff on a unit and then back it up with those every time your opponent plays something, manages to play something that can reasonably block it, you can just stay ahead and win easily. And that used to happen a lot. And it was something that, in theory, anybody could draft that combination of cards. You just needed a random 2-drop and a random buff. But you also need to draw them. And certain colors or certain factions have better or worse access to those mechanics. So it made for a really unpleasantly swingy experience where a lot of the time you would just lose to some unanswered random thing. And that's no longer seems to be the case in the current draft environment. There's much more emphasis on creatures that are a bit smaller than the going rate but have good abilities. Like most stealth units aren't very big, but they have good abilities that do things like at the start of your turn they give you a bonus, or like they untransform if they haven't already and give you a bonus, or when they hit the enemy player they do something powerful like draw a card or make another creature. But they aren't themselves like difficult to block. So there's a really good example is a card called Mavloft Botanist. It's a 2/2 with stealth, with a hidden mechanic. So it costs 3. So a 3-mana 2/2 is quite bad, and your opponent will almost definitely be able to block it. And so it's very much not a guarantee that you're going to be able to actually connect with this Botanist. If you do play a buff spell on it, it will untransform, so your opponent gets to know what it is. But it's all about like trying to make a guessing game of like maybe trying to bluff them into thinking you have a different hidden unit, or baiting them into attacking with all but one of their creatures and then destroying that creature and getting it through and stuff. That's a lot more interesting gameplay wise than okay, I play my idiot and I buff my idiot and now I'm snowballing on you. This is a very long queue time. The queue times in this game are really weird. They take either 3 seconds or 3 minutes. There's no in between. Might cancel it in case it's like gotten stuck. It happens sometimes, I think. Let's just try that again. Sometimes if you cancel and restart, it like works the second time. I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but there might be a bug or a quirk in the queuing system. yeah, I was talking about stealth and draft dynamics. So because of the stealth units aren't very big, a lot of the time your 2 mana creatures and your 3 mana creatures are kind of equivalent size, or which makes the game a lot less snowbally, because if you're going first and you go a 2 mana creature and then a 3 mana creature that's bigger than their 2 mana creature and then a 4 mana creature that's bigger than their 3 mana creature, you can kind of snowball, and if your opponent stumbles or if you have a combat trick to get through their biggest thing, you can stay ahead. This is very similar to, like, this used to happen in Arena in Hearthstone a lot until they radically changed how they designed cards for the format to prevent this, but they had to like really heavily overhaul how cards were made. In Eternal, because you can block, you have more options as the defending player, and you can play combat tricks of your own, but being behind on tempo is still, still can be quite punishing in that situation. Aha, right. Oh yeah, here's the main offender, this 2 mana +2/+2. These days, there are enough ways and means to deal with a random buffed creature or a rare, and enough smaller creatures to fill up your curve, like these, right? These cards are both pretty good. This one blocks well and gets you extra power. This card's great. It's a really flexible utility card that kind of, it looks small, but it has double damage, so it's actually a 4/1. But it dies to ping effects, which are fairly readily available. Or you can just, block it with a small creature and it's fine. We'll get some advantage out of it, but nothing insurmountable. Okay, this is scary. They're pretty far ahead already and I don't have anything. But this will block this. And this is only a 1/3, so it's not too bad. Okay, so they're not affecting the board this turn, which is good. Maybe they're stuck on land, actually, because they've only played the 2. They've only played 1 color so far. Okay, so this is unfortunate. So my opponents missed their 3rd power. So that really constrains their mana for each turn. So hopefully they draw out of it, but this might be a bit of a wash as games go. Speaking of bomb rares, this one's pretty good. So 5 mana 6/5, which is nice and big. Oh, good lord, what's going on? And it gives your units killer, which allows them to attack other units, like in Hearthstone or Duelist all over again. I think my opponent's messed up. They should have attacked with this first and then let me block it, so this would have 2 damage on it, and then attacked. Oh, another thing about Eternal that's different from, that's like Magic but different from Hearthstone, etc., is that damage doesn't persist on units. They heal at the end of the turn. So if I play this has stealth, so they won't necessarily know that it's got 2 toughness, so they might not attack it with their weapon. They've got a thing that lets them attack. Or I could just play my draw spell. This will die to the weapon, so I'd rather get some more value out of this than I'm currently getting. Let's play my power. I don't mind playing this, honestly, because next turn I can do... If I draw another power, I can play this, or I can play like this plus this, or something else. Is this one that can't block? Oh, right, okay. So the way weapons in Eternal work is they give you a certain amount of armor, and when the armor goes away, the weapon goes away. So I just attack here, I hit them for 1, the weapon goes away, and that allows me to deploy this safely, but I don't actually want to discard anything to it, so I'm going to play this anyway. Cool. Okay, so I'm also missing some power, but not as much as my opponent is. Oh my goodness. They've got plenty going on. That's a really good draw, actually. So this has killer. It can, one time, it can attack an enemy unit. So I can get rid of this. Or this. Probably this one. Yeah, this doesn't do anything, so I'll just block it. Other options, I can play my buffed off-book officer. Maybe silence this, so it's just a useless 1/1. And then this is essentially a 6/2, which is not bad against what they've got at the moment. But I think... No, that seems good, because this can't block, so they'd have to double block with these. But then that's... You can block one creature with more than one creature. No, I think this is better. The way the cards are designed in this game definitely gives you a reasonable number of options per turn. Right, I think they've probably run out of stuff now. So I think I'm going to play this and just make a 1/1.
Slow night.
Peace is its own reward.
Mostly because... Oh no! They got me. That's unfortunate. I forgot that card existed. Alright, my opponent's getting their third power. That's good. And their second colour. So now they can play green, aka Justice cards. Do I just block this? What else is this deputy doing? Yeah, I'll just block this. I can block it with my 1/4 next turn, but I'm pretty fine with just letting this 1/1 trade off, because it's not going to do much else. Okay. So this one's now bad, because they have a 1/1 again. I'd rather get some more value out of it. This looks okay here. I can discard, like, this maybe. Get a 4/4 flyer. I'm going to attack it. I'm on 14. I actually need to not die at some point in this game. Although I do have a way to heal. You know what? This will let them get another power, so I think I might actually silence it.
Slow night.
And I'll just attack. I probably should have done these in the other order so they had less information. But I don't think they're going to block with this anyway. Okay, so they've drawn an extra mana. So here's one thing that they've done that's very good for helping with mana flow issues. They've got these power cards that when you play them, you can pay a bunch of excess mana to get a bonus, like a permanent bonus. This one gives you a thing which lets you can pay 5 to get a thing which lets you pay 5 to double up the power and health of a unit, which is obviously quite a big bonus. So this could be the one that there's a shadow one that when it hits you they draw a card. So it could be that. But I think what I might do is attack with everything and be prepared to play dive bomb. But maybe it's better for me to put, actually since I've drawn this, I'm going to give this +2/+2. Do I also give it the extra toughness? I could do that, you know. So if this is 3 attack, these will just trade, which is very awkward. So I think that does kind of price me into this, but this is now a 4/6 that deals double damage. So this is gonna ruin their day. Let me think. This might be a 3/3. I think that's unlikely. I think I can attack with this. I don't think there are any 3/3s in these colors. So I've kind of put a lot of my eggs in one basket with this card, but it doesn't really matter because I have 5 more cards in my hand, which is more than my opponent. Once per turn you can pay 2 to give something unblockable. Fine. They're going to give this unblockable. Okay, it's the one with lifesteal. Fine. This is a good card. It has ambush, so you can play it during your opponent's turn, and then it has flying and deadly, so it basically reads kill an attacking enemy creature. This feels like a good turn to play my rare that gives things killer. We're going to keep this back to block the 4/1. I will attack with this. Probably this again, to be honest. Okay, there wasn't a pause there. They didn't have to think about whether to block, so I suspect this is another Thorncrawler. If they attack with these, I might just block. I don't get killer, but I can just trade off with their stuff, so it doesn't matter. I'd rather be attacking them anyway. Okay, fine. Show me the money. Cool. Opponent, I have bad news. Alright, they're on 15. This is 8 damage. I really want to connect this to their face if I can. Anything good? Does this kill them? If I just attack with everything, what do they do? I can like play this and poke this, which will cause it to reveal, and then potentially kill it with something. Sweet, okay. I was right that it was a Thorncrawler. So then they're on 19 now. I can play a Cobra Gear on this to make it bigger, and then kill that, and then attack. Oh, fair enough. Sorry, opponent. I had too many decisions to make. Apologize for being boring. So this video is just crossed the half-hour mark. So I think I'll kind of push it towards a conclusion. I really like how the dynamics of the draft in this game have now shifted such that it's more balanced and more nuanced. It allows you more opportunities to make decisions, right? The hidden units are a good intellectual challenge for your attacking and blocking decisions. And that kind of plays well into the fact that the attacking and blocking mechanic is one of the most interesting things in Magic, as well, and of course in Eternal as well. I think we saw briefly the kind of utility lands that allow you to mitigate drawing lots and lots of mana, which is a thing that happens a ton in this game. I think I have a couple in my own deck. Just scroll down. This is a common, literally a common design, the Rune of Relocation. So there's a cycle of these, there's one for each faction. And they allow you to pay 5 when you play them to get a bonus. In this case, it returns something to your opponent's hand. There are higher rarity ones called sketches, which give you a thing that gives you a permanent bonus. We saw one that my opponent discarded in the last game. Oh, sorry, played in the last game, which allows you to pay 5 to get a thing that allows you to pay 5 to double something's power and toughness. There's the time one makes a 2/1 for 4 mana. I forget what the others are. There's a cycle. I think the blue one draws a card. I think there's a cycle of those as well. And even I think when Eternal first launched, there was a set of power cards that if you had 5 or more maximum power, they transformed into minions. So like the Shadow one, it was depleted land, which means that basically they don't give you a bonus to your maximum power for that turn. In Magic, this is the equivalent of lands that come into play tapped. So that's bad, but then if you have 5 or more max power, it turns into a 4/4 with lifesteal, which is really good. So it's a way to get more value out of your land selection. I think the way the game, I mentioned the redraw rule earlier, where when you redraw your opening hand, is guaranteed to have between 2 and 4 power. This is nice. They've also got a stipulation that your deck has to have at least 1/3 power cards. So you can't play 2 power in your aggro deck and never draw another one and just have gas all game. That's not allowed. But you can. It's nice knowing that like you're not just gonna have to redraw into Oblivion because you couldn't get any mana. Getting stuck on 2 is still usually a death sentence. It was pretty bad for my opponent in that game. They did manage to put up a good fight because they had a lot of cheap cards in their hand, but you can be in a position where like you literally can't cast anything for the entire game and you just lose. And that's, even if you've got a reasonable number of cheap cards in your deck, sometimes you just don't draw them and you also don't draw any power, and it happens. And it happens in Magic as well. And it's kind of the equivalent of like missing your turn 1 in Duelist. Like Duelist has consistent mana, but that means that the game is much more about curving out. I think I did the maths once, and like a normal Duelist Magma deck, because of the replace mechanic, you had Mercantor on curve like 80% of the time. That doesn't happen in Magic and Eternal. You don't even get to play your 6-drop on turn 6 that much of the time. Never mind also having the 6-drop. Which sounds bad, but outside of those outlier situations where, you don't have any mana, or you have nothing but mana and you can't make any plays, the game, I think the mechanic is more interesting, and I think that what Eternal's done nowadays with these nice land designs and the redraw mechanic, which I think they had in the first place anyway, plus like a reasonable amount of long game mechanics. There's a lot of cards that allow you to pay extra mana to do something. It's called mana sinks in Magic terminology. There's quite a lot of those in the game these days. So that allows most draft games to for most players to be in both. For both players to be relevantly in most draft games. Like in that game there, my opponent was stuck on mana, but they still managed to do some stuff. And once they drew out of it, they were kind of in a reasonable spot, or it looked like for a little bit. I had a very good hand, so I won anyway, but they were still able to play, which I think between the somewhat cruder card design and the very snowbally nature of the balance and the lack of removal in Old Eternal, that was very much not the case. Like, you would have games where you didn't draw any mana, and games where your opponent had a 4/5 on turn 2 that you couldn't answer, and now there are more ways to mitigate good or bad, mitigate sort of outlier flows of mana, and more ways to mitigate your opponent just having a large thing ahead of curve or playing a bomb rare or something. There's like enough removal, enough interaction, enough combat tricks that you can play defensively pretty well without putting too much power into the hands of the offensive player. And I'm not sure I could point to like a single specific example. There are some effects there are fewer of. The fact that the stealth units aren't very big makes a big difference, I think, because the curve of creature power sort of has a dip at 3 and 5, because there's 5 mana stealth units as well. And there's an amount of removal. There's enough removal going around, and enough ways to deal 1 damage to small things that your opponent might be flooding the board with and things like that. So I think the draft environment is much more nuanced than it was at the time, which I've been really enjoying it, actually. I have noticed that sometimes your draft kind of train wrecks and it's not very obvious why. Like, if the actual draft itself doesn't go very well and you end up with a non-functional deck, or a deck that's like just a little bit lacking, and then you draw badly a couple times and you're out. That has happened to me. I think I've had more runs that went to 7 wins or 0 or 1 wins than like the total of the results in the middle. I've had like one or 2 runs that went to 5 wins, and everything else was 7 or nothing. So maybe it's a sample size thing, but you can end up in. I think you can very easily end up with decks that are like absurd or quite bad, with only just a few changes to the draft picks, or if you get like confusing signals and you're not sure which cards to pick, because the drafting in Eternal is more like it is in Magic, or drafting board games like Seven Wonders, than it is in Hearthstone or Duelist, where you just get a selection of 3 cards and it's kind of mostly random what happens. In Eternal, you generally have to figure out, because you get to see lots of cards, but they come in all the different factions. So you've got to try and figure out which factions are more available than the others and try and draft those. As well as thinking about synergy and mana curve and all the rest of it. So it can be very difficult to. Sometimes it's not obvious. Like, you keep seeing good cards in different colors and going, oh, where am I? Where am I supposed to be? And end up with a bit of a mess. And the difference between the decks where I've drafted that have looked like that and the decks that I've drafted that have looked amazing is not actually that big. Like, a handful of cards either way, a couple of rares. Like, it's weird how close the good and bad decks have been to each other, and how narrow the band seems to be. Maybe as I get better at the game, that'll change, but in the meantime, it's kind of an interesting note that may or may not be related to the balance of the game. Right, I think that is about it. I think the summary of this video is Eternal's better now. I think it still has. I wouldn't recommend it as a game to jump into Constructed with. It does give you rewards, but you need so much dust and so many cards to make a constructed deck that what it's actually giving you is chump change. Just it gives you chump change over and over again, which feels nice, but is not actually very helpful. Like it gives you a free pack every day. That sounds like loads. It's not. It's really not. So the constructed format is quite fun. Like I said, I've been playing some with cards I crafted 4 years ago, but I would recommend this on the strength of its draft environment. It is possible to grind gold, which you need for drafts, without having to play against other human beings. There is an AI mode in the game that actually gives rewards. Very meager rewards, but it gives rewards. So if you are, if you don't want to jump into constructed with a bodged together basic deck, you don't have to. So if you run out of gold to draft, which will happen if your drafts fail, you have options to play otherwise. That said, I will caveat this with I've played a lot of Magic the Gathering and other card games in my life, and my first 3 drafts I went 7 wins. So obviously I've got a somewhat biased perspective of someone who hasn't had to grind that much. And when I did want to grind, I was able to build a deck out of stuff I had lying around that was reasonably competitive and reasonably fun to play. I think if you're I don't know what the game gives you as a new player. Maybe it gives you a reasonable amount to get you started. That wouldn't massively surprise me. But take that as a caveat of I will recommend this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up doing the same thing that Arena does, where you get 2 drafts in and then you run out of resources and you're like, okay. I can't speak to that experience because again I haven't had it. And I don't really, when I started playing it years ago, I just wanted to play it, so I didn't mind playing repeatedly and grinding. But those caveats aside, I'm really glad I reinstalled this game. Shout out to LoadingReadyRun for featuring it. And I've been playing lots of drafts. There's a phone version of Eternal, and it's really nicely done. I particularly shout out to the way it handles dropped connections, because my Wi-Fi is a bit flaky, and Runeterra will just if the connection drops while it's loading, it will just start again. And Hearthstone sometimes crashes, whereas Eternal reconnects very quickly and handles it very smoothly. So big shout out for that. It's a nice mobile UI, and it's free. So if you're looking for a phone game, recommended. Thank you for watching, everybody. I will hopefully see you next time. I don't know how often my videos are going to come at the moment. I realize it's been 4 months since the last time I made something. I have just been quite busy. I did try and make a video the other day, and I spent a couple hours putting it together, and I watched it afterwards, and the audio levels were awful. So that's not going to see the light of day, but I'll try and remake it at some point when I have the time and maybe a better idea of how to present it. Till then, thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time, whenever that is.